Hey friends, in this video we're going to look at how the Notes page works inside of Ultimate Brain, and I'll also talk a little bit about how notes in general work inside of this template. So you're going to find notes right here in the sidebar underneath your Ultimate Brain for Notion big old homepage here, or if you go to the productivity views, you will see notes right here. We have sort of 5 main areas on this notes dashboard. We have our inbox, we have our favorites, we have recent, and then we have areas and resources. Within areas and resources, we can switch from our areas to the resources view, so we can see areas here which sort of contain resources for the most part. We also have a daily journal. I've made a whole video about how the daily journal works, but you could add a daily journal entry here if you wanted to. Note that all of these headings here actually link to dedicated pages for all of these views. So your inbox has its own page, your recents has its own page, etc. There's also a quick links bar, so you can easily switch between those areas and inboxes and all this kind of stuff. Again, this is really useful if you're on your mobile phone and you don't have this sidebar just always floating to the left. So that's pretty useful. And additionally, you're going to see on the dashboard that you have access to pretty much all of those areas as well. You can open the toggle list to get access to a identical list view of what you see on those pages, or you can click right over to them. So this is sort of set up to mirror the way that classical note-taking apps work, like Evernote or Bear or Ulysses or OneNote in certain ways. It just gives you really quick access and several options for accessing your notes. If you want to just dump something quickly out of your mind, you can add it to the inbox, or you can add it to the quick capture page, which also has a view of the note inbox. If you have a note that you know is no longer going to be relevant to you after, say, a month or a week, you could add it to the fleeting notes area, and these notes are going to automatically archive themselves. They will go to the old fleeting notes area of the archive if they're not updated in over a month. So these notes just automatically get out of your hair if you don't update them after a while. And again, you put them specifically in the fleeting notes area. If you want to make sure a note is very easily accessible, you could add it to your favorites. And a good way to do that would just be to open it up and check the favorites checkbox there. And there it is. If a note is no longer applicable to your life, you could instead click the archive checkbox, and that will basically make it disappear from everywhere inside of your system, except for the archive where you see it in archived notes. I'm going to unarchive that because it actually might be relevant to my life. And then you can see all of your recents here. And recents really doesn't discriminate. Recents shows you basically everything. Web clips, notes that are already inside of resources, notes that are already inside of projects, all kinds of stuff. And it's basically just sorted by the last updated date. So if you have been using something very recently, it should actually show up here pretty quickly and pretty easily. You can also group by area and resource if you want. So there's a grouped view here where you can see, again, your recent notes, but now grouped by area and resource, and that can be pretty helpful. Quick tip, if you're on a desktop computer and you don't have like a MacBook Pro trackpad where you can 2-finger scroll to the side, you can hold Shift and you can use your mouse wheel to go sideways, which is pretty nice when you have a big long board view like this. So that is pretty much in a nutshell how your notes page works. A couple more things. There are a couple different views here. The inbox has an actual table view, so you can add areas and resources or projects, and you could process from here if you wanted to. And if you also wanted to, you could go to the process page, and I have a whole video detailing this, and you could process your notes from here. The nice thing about the process page and the note processing area in particular is it has a web clip intake area, which will only show notes that have a URL already on them, which if you use the Notion web clipper, you are going to automatically see your notes here. For example, if I go to a random article on this website and I clip it into my Notion workspace using the Notion web clipper and making sure it's in the right database, we will see it inside of that web clip intake area. And from there, we could assign it a resource such as fitness in this case. Now I happen to know that I already clipped this URL before, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete it instead, but that's a good place for processing notes and adding them to the correct area, resource, or project. But you could also do it again from the note inbox here via the table view or on the specific note inbox page as well. So that is pretty much all there is to say about the notes page in general, except for one thing I do notice is that some of these little properties that are displaying are overlapping. And the reason they're doing that is my screen is not wide enough for the sizing of everything that I have right now. So note that when I make these tutorials, I'm very zoomed in on Notion. I could actually come out, and if I went to, that's actually default right there, and that's what I actually see on my screen. But I try to keep things very zoomed in because I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. If you notice that because your screen size is not super big or using this on a phone, that this is really annoying you, you could always come to the three-dot menu right here on any view, choose your properties, and maybe hide, say, the URL, and you're not gonna have that problem anymore. So that's a useful little tip to know. And from there, we are going to talk a bit more about how notes themselves work inside of Ultimate Brain. So we've talked about the notes view. Let's open up a random note and just look a bit at the properties that we have access to. So we have favorite. We've already talked about that. That'll make things show up in the favorite area. Though I guess one other useful thing that I could mention about the favorite thing, favoriting a note will make it show here in the overall favorites area, but it will also make it show in the specific favorites area for your areas and resources. So let's go, let's say over to music, and any note within a resource that is contained by music will show up in our area favorites. Vocal Fry is showing up here, and we can see that it is contained in the singing resource. If I go to singing, we will also see area favorites here. And I guess I should probably rename that to resource favorites, but we've got that favorited. So you have many different places to see your favorites. And on the notes page in particular, I very specifically did not add sorting criteria. So that way you could change the order of your favorites and have your favorite as favorites right here. This works very much like the shortcuts area in Evernote. You can change the order and have it exactly the way you want it. So going back to our note properties, we have our area and resource, we have a project, we can add notes to a project. We also have a type called lecture. And I'll also reference this in the tutorial on areas and resources, but lecture is just a type in a select property, and Ultimate Brain comes with a few different default types. Some of these types are used in filters. For example, daily. Daily notes, if they have the daily type, are only going to show up in the journal. They might also show up in recents, but if you create a daily note in the daily journal, it gets that daily type right away. Web clips will show up in that web clip processing area. Recipes will show up in the recipe tracker, and book notes will show up in the book tracker. So I can show you where those are real quick. We have, if we go back to Ultimate Brain, our book tracker and our recipe book. So every note in the book tracker, if we look, has the type of book, and every recipe in our recipe book will have the type recipe. But some of the other options, to go back and look at this, are just for sorting and grouping. So if I go back to one of my resources, say, what has a lot of notes? Fitness has a lot of notes. Music production has a lot of notes. We'll go to that one. If I go here, I have my resource notes area that is by default showing just an updated sort view. I can actually change this over to by type, and I can sort these into their types. So soundproofing ideas for studio might actually be an idea, and I could drag it from here to here, but I want to show you something cool. If we go to the area, the root area, music, because we have a big long view here in the area notes section, there's a view called matrix. And matrix groups first by these types and then by the resources contained in this area. So I can come into this matrix and I can process my notes into different types if I want to. Soundproofing ideas for studio is going to be an idea type note, and it's still a music production. If I had added a note to this area in general that didn't have a type, so guitar solos to learn, and I just added it to the music area for some reason, I could actually drag it from music to guitar and into idea, or maybe into plan. I could do all kinds of stuff there. So that is what that type property is going to let you do. Review date is actually not being used right now in Ultimate Brain. I think that was a leftover idea that I had there, but you could easily build a to review dashboard for yourself if you wanted to, filtered by review dates. And if you wanted some inspiration on that, we could go over to the deferred page in process. In fact, this might be a good place to put this. You can see we have this week under snoozed, and this filters by, well, it filters by a lot of things, but The most important thing is where snooze is on or before a week from now. So any snooze tasks that are coming up in the next week, we will see here. You can do the same thing for notes and a review date property, which will be pretty cool and pretty useful. Going back to our notes, going through our properties here, we have an image. You can add an image, which is a file attachment type property. In most cases, the image doesn't do much in Ultimate Brain, except in, say, our book tracker. You will note that the layout specifies that our card preview uses the image property. So we're seeing our book covers there. That's what you could do with image, and you could use image anywhere else you want. URL will be for like web clips. We have our created and updated, and then we have a whole lot of specific stuff or just sort of the bowels or the pipeworks of the template here. We have root area, project area. These are roll-ups showing the area if it's a resource note or project note. We have an updated thing for meta displays. We have pulls, which you would actually usually set from a project instead of directly from the note, and then some other resource pull roll-up areas here. You don't really have to worry about these inside of notes. Again, you're going to set pulls in your projects instead. If project is archived, we can tell if the project is archived there. We can see the URL base, and that is actually pretty useful because going back to areas and resources, and let's just say fitness, when we come into the resource page, inside of web clips, we can change from all clips to by site. And it looks like everything I've clipped in fitness is part of bodyrecomposition.com, but we see it underneath that URL base, which is pretty nice. And if we had lots of clips from lots of websites, we would see them grouped by their website, which is pretty cool. And finally, we have some specific properties for those special views. So the recipe book properties are put here, and the book tracker properties are put here. And I've got videos on those two special views, along with video tutorials on how you could create your own special views if you wanted to. So I won't go over these here, but just note that they pertain to the special views that come with Ultimate Brain, including the book tracker and the recipe book. Check out those tutorials if you are curious about how those work. And I think that's gonna about do it for this tutorial on the notes page and the note properties in general. So let me know if you have any questions in the support area, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.